This week on A Nice Cup of History, we're going to talk about the American Revolutionary War. Now, we know the basics of the war. It's America versus Britain, colonies versus the colonisers. We're not actually taught a lot about the war in school. Before our American listeners say it, it isn't because we lost, inverted commas, because it's actually a lot more complicated than that. Because we did, and we didn't. It's just because it didn't seem as necessary to our curriculum to go into detail about it. We know it happened, we just don't know everything about it.
Yeah, we'll therefore go into as much detail as we can without over-egging the custard, so to speak. But if we have different facts to you, then please let us know. History has a way of being distorted depending on which side of it you end up. And on this week's Ridiculous Death, we discuss why you should always check the ingredients list next time you want to dye something green.
So, sit back, keep your tea bags firmly in the cupboard, and let's get historical.
So, let's talk about the lead-up.
Yep.
Like any war, it isn't as simple as, we don't like you, we're going to fight you. America, the country, didn't exist as we know it at first. Originally home to the native/First Nations peoples, it was colonised over the course of about 200 years from the mid-1500s to when the war took place.
We're not here to talk about the evils of colonisation. The impact and frank genocide that resulted against the native peoples was inexcusable. Their treatment still is, but we cannot change what has happened, so please forgive us for discussing it dispassionately, but it's the only way we can do it factually and without letting opinions creep in more than necessary. That is a whole can of conversational worms and we do not have recording time for that. But please know that we have full respect for the native peoples of the Americas. They have such a beautiful and diverse culture and such a rich tapestry of folklore.
Conflicts such as the French and Indian War from 1754 to 1763 and the 7 Years' War from 1756 to 1763 culminated in the Peace of Paris, signed in 1763, which, amongst other things, expelled France from some of her possessions, in inverted commas, on the North American continent, many of which were then ceded to the British, confirmed in King George III's Proclamation Line of 1763.
Colonial expansion continued on the continent, heading north to Nova Scotia and south to what is now Florida. The Spanish had claimed the land south of the Mississippi River, and this led to some border disputes among the individual colonies. In order to enforce the proclamation, permanent garrisons were established across the frontier, but this led to disputes over who would pay for these.
The debts incurred by the 7 Years' War and taxation issues back in Britain meant that the British Parliament needed to find a way to fund their defences using other resources, one of those being taxation on the colonies.
Yeah, so between 1763 and 1765, the Greenville Ministry, the period where the British government was headed by Prime Minister George Grenville, instructed the British Royal Navy to put a stop to smuggled goods being traded in American ports and enforced the custom duties there. The one major one was the 1733 Molasses Act, which levied a tax of 6p per galleon, a fair sum then and worth £14.46 or $19.39 per gallon today, on imported molasses from the new colonies. This had an impact worldwide, but more so in America, as 85% of the exports from New England were made using imported molasses.
Yeah, so if 85% of your exports are made using that, you're going to have to buy a fair whack of it.
Yeah.
And if it's costing you the modern equivalent of £14.5 or $19 per gallon, and you're going to need a couple of hundred gallons of it, you are massively out of pocket.
Massive.
The next thing was the Sugar Act in 1764, which was similar to the Molasses Act, but decreased the levy by half. It did, however, increase the enforcement measures available to those tasked with enforcing the levy. Not a popular move. A following Stamp Act meant that only those who had paid the levy could produce officially stamped documents, making it easier for those who hadn't and were effectively smuggling to be caught.
In 1768, the ship Liberty was seized by Boston port authorities on suspicion of smuggling, which started a riot in the city. This then got further out of hand in 1770, again in Boston, when civilians rioted and started throwing rocks at British port officials. The British troops retaliated by open fire, killing 5 and causing the incident to be known thereafter as the Boston Massacre.
Things continued into 1772, where the British customs ship the HMS Gaspee ran aground and was destroyed. The banking crisis of 1772, which originated in London and spread across parts of Europe, led to the collapse of the previously incredibly powerful East India Company, who were trying to support the banks through trade. You might have heard, if you listen to our pirate episode, which I think was like our second or third episode.
Why are we talking about pirates?
Because we are.
Yeah.
Yeah. That we mentioned the East India Company there because they were quite a powerful opponent to the pirates.
Yeah. In 1773, the Tea Act was passed by the British Parliament in response to the collapse of the East Indian Company in an attempt to try and help it survive. This act allowed the company to ship tea to North America, which it exported duty-free from Britain. The catch being that the tax on the colonies for importing the tea remained in force. Protests against this began, led by merchants and smugglers who would be affected. Now, I love tea, so I get that.
Yeah. If you love tea, you're not going to like what happened next.
I'm obsessed with tea. I drink like 7 cups a day, and I wish I was exaggerating.
To be fair, no, that's fine. I get that. And literally, because we've recorded this back to back with another podcast, we recorded the last podcast while drinking a cup of tea.
Yep.
Because, and it's in our name.
Yeah, it's almost like we want to be. We're British.
Yeah.
I promise. We drink the tea.
I
drink tea, darling.
It's tea. It's always tea, darling. In December 1773, this culminated in an event in Boston where a group calling themselves the Sons of Liberty disguised themselves as native members of the Mohawk people and dumped 342 crates of tea into Boston Harbour. This has become known as the Boston Tea Party, though saltwater tea is not what we would consider a party.
No, that is gross.
I'd like to think that, it's not. There was a lot of a lead up to it, but that was the moment where the British just said, "How dare you!"
If you want to piss off the British, throw their tea into the sea. I mean, there's. I don't know if there's ever been anything more British, as in like, people have thought, how can we piss off the English more? What can we do to piss them off so much?
I mean, there's
throw their tea into the sea.
There's a line in King George's song, isn't there, in Hamilton, where he's like, when you cry in your tea, which you hurl in the sea as you see me go by. So just throw it in there.
Just because it's what we do.
Yeah, you hurt us, America. You
So,
cut us deep.
In reaction, the British government passed the Intolerable Acts, with a deliberate focus on the Massachusetts colony where Boston is located. Instead of punishing the insubordinates there, this only really served to garner them local sympathy to their cause, but also caused some sympathy to be raised over here on the streets thanks to the press, and in Parliament itself.
Royal control in the colonies began to diminish, with power moving from the royal governors to the elected lower houses. The 12 colonies, Georgia didn't join in the fun yet, sent representatives to a small place called Carpenter's Hall in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to this little event called the First Continental Congress.
Yeah, that small little thing.
Yeah. Here they agreed on actions, and it was decided that in order to avoid war, a petition to the king should be sent to King George III to request that he repeal the Intolerable Acts. Fairly decent, yeah.
And when no response was rapidly forthcoming in September 1774, the Suffolk Resolves were endorsed, which called for a boycott on imported British goods, and even went as far as to institute economic sanctions against Britain. This reduced Britain's imports by 97% between 1774 and 1775.
I mean, that's
hardcore.
Yeah. That was a turning point. That was not good.
Mm-hmm.
In February 1775, the British Parliament declared Massachusetts to be in a state of rebellion and instituted a blockade of that colony, limiting trade with the British West Indies and Britain. This was later increased to New England when their ships were banned from trading with the Newfoundland cod fisheries.
So that's the kind of setup. So
Yeah.
now the war begins.
Yeah.
By December 1774, war was inevitable. Bolstering troops through the Irish, allowing Catholics to enlist for the first time, and treaties signed with Germany, the British were able to amass a force of over 32,000 men in America. The problem was, a lot of people still viewed the colonies as British citizens.
Yeah, so we've got a massive army and we're sending it against our own people.
Yeah.
That's why there's some confusion about the Revolutionary War was a revolutionary war, but it was also a civil war as well.
Yeah.
The Declaration of Independence, you might have heard of it,
Mm-hmm.
was drafted and presented to Congress in July 1776.
1776. So we can't do independent and not have Hamilton references. I'm sorry. That'll be the first of probably many.
This was drafted by the Committee of Five,
Mm-hmm.
which consisted of Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, we know him, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston. It identified the colonies as one people, dissolved political links with Britain, and accused George III of several counts of violation of English rights. So that they're coming for the king.
It didn't go well when, someone tried to come for kings back in the 1600s with good old Cromwell.
Yeah, he who shall not be named.
Independence was voted for by Congress on the 2nd of July, and the Declaration was published on the 4th of July, hence Independence Day, on the 4th of July. This officially began the civil part of the struggle, separating the people in the colonies in patriots, those who supported American independence, and loyalists, those who wanted to remain under British rule. It's not clear what the actual percentage split was, however.
Throughout this, we'll refer to them as patriots or the Continental Army, we won't call them Americans or US people because the US didn't exist at that point.
Yeah.
And American and British were kind of, they were half and half. There wasn't really much of a distinction. We'll also refer to the Loyalists as either the Royal Forces or the British Forces. Okay, so Congress knew they couldn't do this alone, so they formed the Committee of Secret Correspondence. Clearly not that secret, which shared information and created or strengthened alliances through the correspondence and secret agents in Europe. One major ally in France was secured by Silas Deane in Paris.
The war officially began on the 19th of April 1775 with the battles of Lexington and Concord, following an attempt from the British to secure the Concord Arsenal.
The battle was fought in the Middlesex County province of Massachusetts Bay. We're only going to give you the basics of the battles, such as any notable figures involved, but mostly just the basic facts. For those wanting more detailed reports, such as a play-by-play or the types of arms or armaments used, we suggest further reading.
Yep.
Otherwise, this would be a long podcast.
Very long. On the side of the colonies, 49 were killed, 39 wounded, and 5 deemed missing in action. Missing in action. On the side of the British, it was 73 killed, 174 wounded, and 53 deemed missing in action. The British succeeded in their goal to destroy cannon and supplies located in Concord, but it is an American victory overall, as they successfully drove the British forces back to Boston.
Yeah, we will state in this war, when we give you facts and figures of how many died, how many were wounded, this isn't a case like it used to be of he who has the most at the end wins. It's a case of it depends on how many people fought. So Britain might have lost more, but they would have more soldiers to lose.
Yeah.
So don't take that as an indication of winning or not. In May 1770, no. The Patriots were assisted through a warning that came in the form of a now famous late-night ride known as the Midnight Ride by silversmith Paul Revere to warn the commander of the Concord militia so that he could prepare the resistance.
In May 1775, 4,500 British reinforcements arrived, led by Generals William Howe and John
Burgoyne
and Sir Henry Clinton. The Battle of Bunker Hill saw them seize Charlestown Peninsula, which cost them over 1,000 casualties.
Yeah, it was a heavy casualty war.
My tongue just felt really fat when I was talking then.
Yeah, I wasn't taking the mick, I was just emphasising with that.
Oh, no, it's fine.
On the 14th of June, 1775, John Adams, the congressional leader, nominated a certain George Washington as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, and he was officially proclaimed General...
Here comes the General!
Rise up! And Commander-in-Chief of the Army of the United Colonies by John Hancock on the 16th of June. He didn't officially assume command, however, until the 3rd of July. Gotta have a handover period, let him walk into it.
Yeah, you've got to help, haven't you? You've got to tell the other person to tell you what to do.
Yeah, probationary period.
Isn't it, though?
Yeah.
In March 1776, Henry Knox arrived at Dorchester Heights, accompanied by heavy artillery from the captured fort
Ticonderoga,
which Washington used to fortify Dorchester Heights. This allowed them to fire on the British ships on Boston Harbour. General Howe abandoned Boston on the 17th of March and fled to Halifax, Nova Scotia, whilst Washington moved his men south to New York City.
The American forces led skirmishes into Nova Scotia and other parts of Canada from August 1775, but without success, and they were defeated at the Battle of Quebec on the 31st of December 1775. American ships, however, blocked the British on Lake Champlain until the Battle of Valcour Island on the 11th of October 1776 moved them. Sadly, their actions in Canada only served to alienate the Canadians from the Patriot cause.
It's only when we do proper research, like with this, you realise how many places in America have the same names as what we have in England.
Yeah. And it's kind of confusing for us to talk about it. Obviously, in America, if I was to say to an American, New England, or if I was to say to an American Plymouth, or Suffolk, or Norfolk, or Birmingham, they'd be like, oh yeah, Birmingham, Alabama, or Plymouth Rock. To us, Plymouth is a place down south.
Yeah.
Suffolk and Norfolk are
where we live.
Where we live. Birmingham's where I'm from. It's just like, okay, get new names, guys.
Well, if we named them and they kept them, but it's a lot. It's weird.
I mean, Vancouver was named from the bloke that lived down the road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Anyway, that was just my little tidbit. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Meanwhile, in Virginia, Governor Lord Dunmore made a proclamation on the 7th of November 1775 that promised freedom to any slaves willing to fight for the crown.
That's a big deal.
That is a big deal.
This proclamation didn't help much, though, when the British forces were defeated at the Battle of Great Bridge on the 9th of December 1775, which forced them to take refuge on British ships anchored off the port of Norfolk. When there was no sign of the Patriot forces there, under the 3rd Virginia Convention, disbanding their militia or accepting British martial law, Dunmore ordered his ships to open fire on the town of Norfolk, with some landing parties coming ashore and setting light to certain strategic properties. This is known as the Burning of Norfolk, and happened on 1st of January 1776. Happy New Year, have fire.
Right. In June 1776, Howe left Nova Scotia and set south for New York. He landed troops on Staten Island and half-heartedly tried to negotiate peace on the 30th of July, but the Patriots rejected this. I mean, he tried.
He did try. Washington ordered the creation of Knowlton's Rangers, which is an intelligence unit, which then led to the creation of the Culper Spy Ring, which was a big help to Washington and his men.
On the 27th of August, at the Battle of Long Island, General Howe forced Washington and his men back to Brooklyn Heights, but was unable to encircle them fully. This allowed General Henry Knox to begin an overnight bombardment of the British forces. Washington and co. agreed on the 29th of August that a retreat to Manhattan would be the best bet, carried out by crossing the East River.
September 1776 saw an attempt at peace with the Staten Island Peace Conference, but this failed when it was realised that the British delegates weren't able to recognise independence, only offer pardons. So they went there saying, we want our independence. The British were like, this is above my pay grade. I can give you a pardon. It's kind of like that when you want to speak to a manager in a store and that person's like, I can offer you an exchange for the same price, but I can't give you a refund. It's like, no, I want my independence. Yeah. You can't do it. This is over.
Fact. On the 15th of September, Howe seized New York City after landing at Kips Bay, though he was unsuccessful on the 16th of September at the Battle of Harlem Heights. He also failed again to encircle the American forces at the Battle of Pell's Point on the 18th of October, leaving the Patriots free to withdraw to safety.
The British managed a victory when they captured Fort Washington on the 16th of November, the heaviest defeat for George Washington. I mean, it was named after him, he lost it. This and a number of other successes at the time led to an impression that the British could win within the next 12 months, but Washington and his men weren't done yet.
Overnight on the 25th and 26th of December, so Christmas Day, 1776, Washington led his men across the Delaware River, approximately 30 miles upriver of Philadelphia, surprising the Hessian, German mercenary forces garrison at Trenton in New Jersey. This victory boosted the American morale considerably. A British rebuke was quashed at the Battle of Assunpink Creek, and a second victory for Washington followed on the 2nd of January 1777 at the Battle of Princetown.
Genuine irreverent aside here. I'm so glad I forgot to give you a warning about the Battle of Assunpink Creek, because the first time I was writing this out, the amount of times I put Aspic instead. And I got it wrong, so well done. Very well done.
Thanks.
Other skirmishes continued across the country over the next 8 months, but no significant ground was gained or lost.
On the 24th of August 1777, General Howe landed his men in
Chesapeake
Bay and defeated Washington at the Battle of Brandywine on the 11th of September. But instead of dealing with the upstart once and for all, he allowed Washington to withdraw.
So he had him, but then he let him go. Forts Mifflin and Mercer were constructed along the Delaware River to prevent Howe from being able to resupply via the sea. The Royal Navy tried, but failed to take the forts in late October, but then were able to capture Fort Mifflin on the 16th of November. Fort Mercer was then abandoned.
On the 6th of February 1778, France and America signed the Treaty of Amity and Common. I'm trying really hard.
You got the tricky word out of the two, though.
On the 6th of February 1778, France and America signed the Treaty of Amity and Commerce, which regulated trade between the countries and set up a military alliance against Britain. In return, Congress defended French interests in the West Indies. The invitation was extended to Spain, but Charles III declined, though they did end up making some contributions to help the Patriot cause.
Yeah. A number of French officers joined the Continental Army, but weren't very effective. I think the phrase used was rankly incompetent. One exception, however, was Gilbert du Motier, aka the Marquis de Lafayette, who acted as a liaison with the French army and the navy.
Lafayette?
Yep. Good old Lafayette. So.
Hey! So we're now at a stalemate.
Yeah.
General Howe resigned in late 1777 and was replaced in May of 1778 with Sir Henry Clinton. Force was consolidated in New York, with the British leaving Philadelphia in June of that same year.
Washington led the Patriot forces against Clinton and the British on the 28th of June 1778 in New Jersey at the Battle of Monmouth. This battle officially ended what was known as the Philadelphia Campaign, but at a cost. With 370 confirmed, but up to 500 estimated casualties on the Patriot side, and 358 confirmed, but up to 1,100 estimated for the British. The battle itself was inconclusive, but it did prove to be a boost to Patriot morale.
A French naval force then assisted Washington at the Battle of Rhode Island, which was also indecisive, with storms causing the French Navy to withdraw.
Yeah, if you've got ships that back then relied on the wind for sails and everything, one of the worst enemies was the weather.
The English had so much help with weather.
We did. We should not have won half the battles that we have won if it wasn't for the weather.
Nope.
Yep. Several small skirmishes followed, with settlements along the Quebec border being destroyed. The Continental Army struggled with morale, and inflation made the dollar virtually worthless. Supply problems led to a lot of desertion and mutinies, causing infighting that the Patriot Army didn't need.
In June 1780, Clinton sent 6,000 men to retake New Jersey, and the Battle of Connecticut Farms ensued. The Patriots withdrew, but Washington's main force wasn't engaged, and the British retreated. 2 weeks later, the Battle of Springfield ended with a British defeat.
This is why we're kind of saying that we won, we lost, but we didn't, because it's tit for tat.
Yeah.
In July 1780, a certain guy called Benedict Arnold was appointed as the commander of West Point. Arnold defected to the British, but failed to effectively plan in handing over the fort, and his contact, Jean Andre, was captured and executed. Arnold escaped and joined the British fully, but he was a turncoat, and no matter where you go, turncoats aren't exactly popular.
No. There was a number of skirmishes, including clashes with the Spanish in St. Louis. The Licking River Valley was the scene of a great deal of violence. The French attempted to capture Detroit, but the Miami natives put a stop to this. It ended with the British in Detroit and the Patriots moving westward along the Ohio River. It was effectively a stalemate, with neither side gaining much meaningful ground at all.
No. So, then we move to the south. It was realised that there was more profit on tax duties in the south by the British, and consolidating their hold there would have the Patriots surrounded on all sides. But it didn't go to plan.
The local loyalist militia didn't join through choice. They were under threat of their land being confiscated, which would mean losing their livelihoods. They were poorly trained and even more poorly motivated.
An assault on Charleston led to looting by the British troops, which was badly received by both sides in the conflict. After a failed attempt to recapture Savannah, the British commander Prevost was replaced by Lord Cornwallis, who realised that the support for the Loyalist cause was overrated. His forces were soon bolstered by Clinton.
The British troops captured Charleston in May 1780, with what was possibly the greatest defeat for the Patriots' forces in the war, with their southern army all but destroyed.
Clinton then returned to New York, with Cornwallis left to oversee things in the south. Their goodbye was apparently less than friendly, and their animosity would have a knock-on effect later.
Previously, any Patriots that had been captured were released home on the proviso that they would never again take up arms against the king. However, this changed and they were now expected to fight against their former comrades. This led to resistance skirmishes across South Carolina.
The British defeated the new commander, General Horatio Gates, at the Battle of Camden on the 16th of August 1780, but they were unable to hold the countryside and their forces were too divided to provide effective support.
Following the Battle of Kings Mountain, Loyalist forces dispersed, and this led to further British defeats. The British managed to rally for victory against the forces of Nathanael Greene at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse on the 15th of March in 1781, but there were heavy casualties, and the British had to retreat to North Carolina for supplies and reinforcements.
By the middle of 1781, the Patriots controlled most of the Carolinas and Georgia. Fort Watson and Fort Mott were recaptured in April, and General Andrew Pickens led a militia to capture Fort Augusta.
So that was the south, and we're now at the west.
Yeah.
In 1779, the Spanish joined France in their war against Britain, but the treaty signed allowed Spanish military action in North America. To get around this, though, they allowed Americans to import supplies and munitions. Don't know why that was so hard. My brain was like, that is not a word. To New Orleans, which would then be shipped to Pittsburgh. This allowed the Patriots to bypass the British blockade along the Atlantic coast.
Yeah, so the Spanish basically said, we'll join France in their naval war against Britain, but we won't interfere militarily in North America, but we will send you supplies and munitions so that you can do it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Some combat against the British outposts was undertaken by the Spanish, despite their treaty terms, which opened up the Mississippi River. So that allowed the Patriots to go up and down the Mississippi, which, if you've ever seen it, is a massive river, so it gave them a lot
Quite long.
Yeah, it's an arterial river, it gave them a lot of access. In 1781, West Florida was secured along the Gulf Coast, crippling the supply of arms to the British Indian allies. Yeah, and we didn't explain this earlier, but a lot of the native tribes actually allied with Britain to help out.
Yep. So now we're towards the end of the war.
Yeah.
In 1781, the British forces were less than coherent, and this left an opening. Washington allied with the Comte
de Rochambeau.
and he exploited this, sort of. Washington wanted to attack New York, but Rochambeau wanted to go for Virginia. Washington permitted a force under Lafayette to go to Virginia. Clinton thought that this was planning for an attack on New York and instructed Cornwallis to set up a fortified sea base for the Royal Navy to be able to evacuate troops for the defence of New York.
Lafayette entered Virginia, but Cornwallis had withdrawn to Yorktown. Lafayette received naval support from the French Navy, but Cornwallis did not engage in time and abandoned the outer defences.
On the 31st of August, British commander Thomas Graves led a fleet to Yorktown. He was intercepted at the Battle of Cheapsake Bay, but this was indecisive. Graves had to retreat, which left Cornwallis isolated. On the 16th of October, emissaries were sent to Washington from Cornwallis to negotiate a surrender. It took 12 hours, but these were finalised on the 17th of October.
Now, one person who is yet to be mentioned in this, but is very much in the public eye at the moment, and who was instrumental in leading the charge that led to the surrender of Cornwallis, was one Alexander Hamilton.
Alexander Hamilton.
The French, under the guidance of the Marquis de Lafayette, laid siege to the fortress Redoubt 9, whilst Hamilton and his infantry laid siege to Redoubt 10. Cornwallis couldn't handle both at the same time, and it ended in the British surrender. We may come back to this interesting figure at some point in the near future. We can't throw away that shot.
Hey! Oh, we've done many. Clinton took the blame for the defeat and spent the rest of his life as a show. Clinton took the blame for the defeat and spent the rest of his life as a social pariah. Patriot forces supervise the armistice and facilitate British departure, and a law of Parliament was passed in January 1782. This was to prohibit further British offensive action in North America.
Yeah, so the British Parliament were like, you know what? We're not going to attack you no more.
We're just going to leave.
Things did happen afterwards, including the burning of the White House.
Yeah.
But we won't talk about that because that didn't go so well for you guys. You Americans. Our friends. We love you. Yeah.
She sounds sarcastic, but she isn't being sarcastic.
Yeah. That was more like it didn't end so well for you guys, but we actually love you guys because you love us.
Yes, we're friends now.
In November 1782, negotiations were held in Paris that led to a preliminary signing of an acknowledgement of American independence. They finally got it!
That is fab. Full withdrawal was completed in stages along the coastal cities, and loyalist militias were transported to Nova Scotia and the British Caribbean.
On the 3rd of September 1783, the Treaty of Paris formally ended the war. The Continental Army was decommissioned and the clean-up began.
The total loss of life is unknown, with diseases such as smallpox and dysentery being responsible for more deaths in the conflict directly. Upwards of 70,000 Patriot troops died in active service, with approximately 6,800 of these dying in battle, with a further 17,000 as a result of disease.
The French lost approximately 2,112 troops in the conflict, with the Spanish having about 124 killed and 247 wounded.
The British lost approximately 6,046 in North America between 1775 and 1779. About 7,774 Germans died alongside the British, with around 4,888 deserters.
That's why we're saying don't take it as how many were killed were the winners, because by that, technically, the Patriots lost more, but they won independence.
Yeah.
So it took a long time and a lot more bloodshed for something similar to the America we know today to emerge. But this is a rough sketch of the conflicts involved in the Revolutionary War and the cost of those. This doesn't factor in the cost to civilians who are always caught up in war.
Yeah.
And we know that from history, we know that from recent history, we know that right now with what's going on with Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah.
It's always the civilians that get caught up.
Yes. But that is it for the American Revolutionary War. There's a lot more detail, and we would recommend reading for... Oh my God.
Are you okay?
I don't know. So that's it for the American Revolutionary War. There's a lot more detail, and we would recommend further reading about the smaller skirmishes that we haven't included here. But take what you read with a pinch of salt and try to get perspectives from both sides. History is often written by the victors, so you need to dig a little deeper for the truth.
Yeah, and that's why we kind of want to do things like this where we get as much information as possible, because as we said at the start of the podcast, we're not necessarily taught this in school. We're taught that, yes, there was American independence, it was during the time of George III, there was George Washington, there was a Declaration of Independence, a couple of people signed it, and then there was the American Civil War. That's about it. That's all. The most I've ever done on American history was Roosevelt and the New Deal post-war. That was it. Anything pre that, whatever.
No, we did quite a bit more at my school. I used to see a lot of our exam, a big piece of our coursework when I was in GCSE years, which is when we're 15, 16 when we do GCSEs, which is like our big exams in England.
Yeah.
And a big piece of our coursework, which was about 30-40% of overall grade, was about race relations in America in the early 1900s. Yeah, it was a lot of that. And we also did the Cuban Missile Crisis. We did JFK. We probably did quite a lot on America, to be fair.
See, we have a national curriculum here where you've got the basics of what you need to learn, but when you do GCSEs, you have different exam boards, and different exam boards test you and teach you different things. So I think we had different exams, because I did an A-level history as well, and I learned about British political history, so from Lloyd George onwards, which was the most mind-numbing thing ever. Russian history.
Yeah, I did the Russian Revolution.
Which was fascinating. I mean, Russia, for all their faults, they are a fascinating country, but they always seem to kill somebody who does good things for them. And we did German history, so the rise of Hitler.
We did the rise and fall of Hitler in GCSE.
Yeah, again, interesting. And we did American history from the New Deal, the Depression, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. That was it. But like, you did the Elizabethan era and like medical history as well, which would have been fascinating.
History of medicine was my favourite part of history. It was really cool. We did a whole term on that.
I would have preferred that to Lloyd George any day. Any day.
But yeah, and I do think that is very much... I would be really interested to speak to other people, possibly our age, we're at school at the same time, and to see how certain things were taught for them. Like, I'd actually be quite fascinated to see how the wars, World War One and World War Two, is taught in different countries.
Yeah.
Like, how does America learn about it? How does Germany? How are Germans taught World War One and World War Two?
Yeah.
Like,
exactly.
Because it is all down to interpretation and, like you said, what side you're on.
These more modern history, we've got records. We can tell different sides, but the further back you get, the more wishy-washy the documents get. The more you're relying on what was written down, and what was written down was either written down by the educated or those with an agenda. So you've got to dig a little deeper. And it gets quite tricky, and it would be interesting. And I'm also fascinated to find out what people call the eras, because we've got like the Tudor period, the Victorian period, the Stuart era, the Hanoverian era.
We even have medieval, Renaissance. They're different parts.
The Renaissance was all across Europe, so that's one thing we've all got in common. But like the Hanoverian era to us was the Revolutionary era to America. The Victorian era to us is the Civil War era to them. So it's like same period but a completely different name. So if I was to go up to an American and be like, oh my god, tell me about your country during the Victorian era, they'd be like, what?
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah.
And I think that I don't know whether enough is taught about places you don't live in.
And it's interesting to figure out what happens in history at the same time. I mean, we've talked about this before and I've blown your mind with some things.
I hate when these things happen.
Yeah, it's like this happened at the same time as this and the same time as this. Like, Abraham Lincoln could, in theory, have sent a fax to a samurai in Japan. What? What?
No. And what's the one about, is it Cleopatra was as...
Yeah, she lived closer in time to the Industrial Revolution, which happened in the 1800s, than she did to the construction of the pyramids. And Stonehenge is older than the pyramids. Is it older than the pyramids? I think it's older than the pyramids.
I just don't like...
What?
I don't like it.
I don't like it.
So that's 2 Marvel references we've got into this one.
It's not older than the pyramids. I apologise. It's older than the Acropolis.
2 Marvel references we've got into this. I'm proud of us.
Yeah.
So let's
Ridiculous
go
death.
back. This is our segment where we look at what hilarious, funny, ironic, stupid reasons people have taken themselves off of this planet we call Earth.
Plucked themselves from the gene pool.
As they say, yes. And this isn't a specific person. This is like a group of people.
Yeah. So fashion was a big thing.
Yes, and it's happened over a few hundred years.
Mm-hmm.
The first recorded case of someone dying of this was in 1778, which is why we're talking about it.
Matches nicely.
Yeah, and this dress is actually still it's in a museum in Battersea Museum, and it still tests positive.
Oh, okay.
Now, yeah. So, basically, what we're talking about is there was this company in Germany called the Wilhelm Dye and White Lead Company, and they developed a new green coloured dye.
Yeah.
Now, and it was brighter than most traditional green dyes. It was bolder, the shade was jewel-like, and it quickly began being called emerald green. So everyone has heard of the colour emerald green.
Yeah, it's like that vibrant green you associate it with jewels and
Yeah.
beautifulness and finery.
And women absolutely loved it.
We do love nice colours.
Yeah, and this is largely because during this time, there was gas lighting rather than candlelight. And it meant that when women went out to parties at night, the rooms were considerably brighter than they had been a few decades before. Party goers wanted to make sure that they were wearing the most beautiful, boldly dressed, because they could now be seen better.
Yeah, you don't want to look dull at a ball.
Yeah, but it wasn't just in dresses. People also began using emerald green for wallpaper and carpets.
Okay.
And if we jump over to Victorian Britain, this is when you were said to be bathed in green.
Yeah.
So that's why there's lots of green dresses, green wallpapers, carpets, rugs, tapestries, blah, 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 blah.
Even Queen Victoria had a green wall, didn't she?
Yeah, but unfortunately, the reason that the dye was so striking is because it was made with arsenic. Yeah. And the effects of arsenic exposures are horrific. Not only is it completely deadly, it is also it produces ulcers over your entire skin. Like, people who then come in close contact with you might develop scabs and sores, hair can fall out, people can vomit blood before their livers and kidneys shut down. So what was happening is, like, people were wearing green dresses and then the dye was seeping into their skin. And they were taking off the dresses and they had sores and ulcers, put a different green dress on, it just exacerbated it and they died.
Especially in like balls, you've got all these heavy clothes surrounded by people, you're going to be dancing, it's going to be warm, you're going to sweat, your pores are going to open and things are going to seep in.
Yeah. And there's some people that used to wear just green gloves because if they couldn't afford all of it, and they'd when you wear gloves your hands get sweaty, which exacerbates the issue. Took off the gloves and the skin basically came off with them. Yeah. Children were sadly dying because they were crawling around in their nursery on the green floors. Emerald green into the children, arsenic poisoning, dying. So yeah, it wasn't until later on in the Victorian period that they realised that this emerald green colour needed to be sealed, and it wasn't until 1895 that regulations put in place where they realised that, you know what, this may be kind of bad.
So about just over 120,
yeah,
120, nearly 130 years ago.
Yeah. And but because of this, obviously a lot of people who made the outfits obviously got ill as well. But to this day, green dye, because of that, still has a reputation among seamstresses. It doesn't kill anyone, obviously. We don't use arsenic in clothes making anymore, in dyes. But you get superstitions, like you can't say the Scottish play on a stage.
Yep.
It's the same as they don't like working with green dye. It's meant to bring bad luck, which is weird because green is considered good luck with the Irish, with the clovers and whatnot.
Yeah, it's considered a lucky colour, but...
Yeah. So from the first recorded dress, it's actually a really pretty dress. That really pretty dress, 1778, and it still now has tests positive for arsenic in the dye of the green.
So it's still a fatally toxic dress.
Yeah.
Wow.
So our ridiculous deaths is for women who wore a lot of green and died of arsenic poisoning.
Why? I mean, I know people have hurt themselves and killed themselves for fashion, but that is going far.
Yeah, and for the British saying, it's possibly the worst thing to want to be bathed in.
Yes.
Bathe in arsenic green.
You thought we'd have learned faster than 200 years.
Nah.
Apparently not.
People want to look good.
Yeah, this is true.
Yeah, so be careful next time you put on your favourite green hoodie or green t-shirt or get some fancy green wallpaper.
Read the label. just read the label. I mean, I would hope they would have to put may contain arsenic. Maybe.
Anyway,
Thank you so much for listening. If you want to get in touch, recommend an episode, then you can do so Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I forgot the word then. Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at Cup of History.
Or email us at acupofhistory@outlook.com.
Indeed.
And now Carrie bought ice cream. I'm hungover, so I'm going to go and eat this ice cream, and we'll speak with you soon.
Woot woot. Ice cream!